How do you handle Nico Collins after he has been removed from injured reserve, or at least designated to return from injured reserve? What are we doing with the Titans backfield now that it just got a little bit more muddy? And is Theo Johnson a guy that you can look at flexing out in Germany in Week 10 in the FFPC, plus the 2022 FFPC World Famous Playoff Challenge $500,000 winner and 17th place owner in the 2024 Fantasy Pros Championship? Chuck Root rejoins the show tonight to talk a lot about the Buffalo Bills, a little bit about TJ Hawkinson, and a little bit more about the Indianapolis Colts receivers named Josh Downs and Michael Pittman. We've got a great show for you. Ferrell Elliott is here. I'm Eric Balkman. Stick around. Your high-stakes fantasy football hour starts now.
Can't stand the pressure. I've seen greater men than need a lesson.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now watching the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. Welcome to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com with your hosts Eric Balkman and Ferrell Elliott. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for analysis from the best players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here are Eric Balkman and Ferrell Elliott.
Solace in the scripture. Are we not all our father's sons? I became a man. Nobody ever told me what a man was.
Thank you so much, Rob. Greetings and salutations. Hi, hello, and welcome. How are you? This is the latest episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com. Greetings and salutations to all of the Balkaholics and Ferrelliacs tuning in tonight. I am your slightly above average host, Eric Balkman. You may know me from the RotoViz High Stakes Slowdown, the Fantasy Football Players Championship, or the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Our commissioner, the definitive commissioner of fantasy football, Ferrell Elliott from the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, is my co-host, and he will join me shortly. Coming up on tonight's show, we are going to get into the situation going on with Tampa with no Mike Evans this week as they get ready to take on another tough opponent. And let's talk about Quentin Johnston. Let's talk about Najee Harris. Let's talk about Rico Dowdle without Dak Prescott and a bad situation going on in Dallas right now. Plus Chuck Root, a guy who won the $500,000 grand prize just a couple of years ago in the world famous FFPC Playoff Challenge, will join us to talk about how he shot up into the top 20 of the Fantasy Pros Championship thanks to two guys in last night's game. We'll get into that in a little bit. We'll also talk a little bit about the Buffalo Bills backfield with him, as well as how to handle Christian McCaffrey and the backups to Christian McCaffrey going forward. If you want to connect with us on X, please feel free to do so at HSFF I am at Eric Balkman, EricBalkman. And of course, check out the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship at KFFSC.com. That is Ferrell Elliott's baby, and I would encourage you to check it out for 2025, including the drafts that are going to be popping off Super Bowl weekend coming up in just a few months at KFFSC.com. High Stakes Fantasy Football at gmail.com is where to reach us. If you have any questions, queries, comments, quibbles, and complaints, send them in there. You can also post in the X or on the X tonight, in the YouTube chat room, in the Facebook chat room, whatever you want to do. We'll get to all those questions in our fantasy feedback segment coming up later on in the show. Thanks to our audio engineer and my best friend, Bryce, and of course our producer and mutual friend Rob. Hey, if you have not checked out the Fantasy Football Players Championship Weekly Challenge, this is a good weekend to do so. Go to myffpc.com, myffpc.com, to play the FFPC Weekly Challenge. There is no draft, there is no salary cap. You are putting together a team of your own volition. No stacking, only one player per team. If you want Patrick Mahomes, you can't have Travis Kelce. If you want Jalen Hurts, you can't have A.J. Brown. If you want Sam Darnold, you can't have Aaron Jones, that kind of thing. No stacking in that. But you pick whatever players you want. If you want to play with or without kickers and defenses, that's totally up to you. One player per NFL team. Enter for as little as $35. Win up to $2,500. 10, 30, and 100 team contests at your disposal. Go to myffpc.com. Myffpc.com is where to go for that. Without further ado, let's bring him in, ladies and gentlemen. He is our guest co-host this evening and every other evening on here, the commissioner of definitive commissioner of fantasy football, the guy who runs the KFFSC. It is Ferrell Elliott. Ferrell, have you recovered from that bonanza game we saw last night between the Bengals and the Ravens yet?
I just want to go watch it again, Balky. I liked everything but the last 50 seconds of it, for obvious reasons. Man, it's got me thinking about the future, Balky. I'm way into the future in fantasy football this week.
What do you mean you're into the future?
Well, this is the kind of time when you begin to look at your teams that are eligible for the playoffs in the FFPC and in the Fantasy Pros. Here in Kentucky, not only is he eligible, but our guest Chuck Root, he's leading the Julian Edelman division on Super Bowl Sunday. He's Joe Namath division. He's eligible. He's also leading Big Payback 2 from August. And I think I think probably Chuck is looking at those teams and he's projecting what he might encounter going forward. And he's looking at the schedule. And I think anyone that has the Baltimore Ravens on the schedule and has the opponents, I know Pittsburgh has got them twice. And, if you have players on the teams that are going to be opposing Baltimore, you have to be very pleased with what you saw last night about their capacity or lack thereof to defend the pass. And if you're in a situation where you have multiple Ravens offensive players like I do, you have to realize that they can never take their foot off the gas. So for fantasy footballers, the Baltimore Ravens, when they have the ball and when they don't have the ball, are a real bonanza so far moving forward.
And it's been fun. And that game was fun last night, too. I was talking with the Dizzle about this today, Ferrell, that I looked at my Kentucky scores last night just to see where I had Burrow and I had Chase and Jackson and so on and so forth. And there was one league where I put up a 55.4 in Kentucky. And I said, boy, I don't remember having Jamar Chase in that league. And I did it. I went and I looked. The 55.4 not only was what Jamar Chase put up last night, but it was the exact amount combined that Joe Burrow and Rashad Bateman put up. So I had Burrow and Bateman in that league. When I saw the 55.4, I immediately thought I had Chase. Not so fast, my friend. It was Burrow and Bateman, which I'm still thrilled with.
And congratulations having Bateman in the starting line.
Don't congratulate me because that was poor management on my wide receivers in that league. So I was forced to start Bateman. It wasn't some kind of shrewd, hey, I got a hunch here. It was the best of a bad situation, and it worked out. So we'll see what happens with that going forward. It was a fun game last night, but we have plenty to talk about going forward here in Week 10, and we'll start it off with the Houston Texans surprise announcement today that they have designated Nico Collins for return. Now, he did not practice Wednesday. He did not practice Thursday. I'm trying to find out, did he practice today in any kind of capacity, be it limited or anything like that? That I don't know. You did? He did, Ferrell?
I'm sure he did.
Okay. Yes, he limited practice today. You are dead on accurate. So limited practice today. He could play, but the problem with that is it is not only a late game on Sunday, it is the latest game on Sunday. It is the Sunday night game against the Lions. So you really are going to have a good feeling in order to play him the first game back. You're also running into the situation of how much he's going to be used. Is he going to be on a snap count? I don't know. I am staying away from him in Week 10, even if he's back, Ferrell. As tempting as it is to start him, there's just so many unknowns. I got to be in a real bad situation to start Nico Collins this week.
Okay, I congratulated you for Bateman. I'll flip it to you this way. If you had a same starting time, who would you play, Bateman or Collins?
If I had the same starting time.
Yeah, there you go. Now you've got something to be congratulated about if you pull the Bateman switch.
Well, here's the thing. If it was the same time and I knew Collins was active, yes, I would lean forward to Collins there. Or I would lean towards Collins there. But let's say Collins was playing at 3:25 and Bateman was Thursday, or Bateman was 1 o'clock.
No, now you're changing the question.
I'm changing it. Then I would have played Bateman. So all things considered, I would lean towards Collins if I knew he was active.
All things considered.
Yeah.
Well, you got to talk to the Dizzle face-to-face today. That's a great conversation because when you're talking to Dizzle, you're usually talking to the smartest guy in the room. Next smartest guy in the room, I mean, look at all this Kentucky love we're getting. Mike's going to join us. next year. Thanks for those kind words, Mike. That's really good stuff. And last night, what was that thing you're doing last night? It's a Thursday night show. It comes on right after Seinfeld. What was you were on there?
Exactly. Yeah. It's must-see TV, Ferrell. It's must-see TV.
You were on there with Stacy.
Yes, it was the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network, featuring Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship superstar, Fantasy and Frames, and Player Profiler's own Stacy Perez co-hosted with me last night.
Stacy is a busy girl, and I'm really thrilled with how she's doing with the podcast and the presentation she was making. I stayed with it long enough for both of you to disappoint me in the way you mishandled the Mike Williams question.
Okay.
And she started down the road of she made a real wrong turn on the Williams, and I'll be damned if you didn't hop in your car and follow her down that road. And I just so there's an example of looking forward. Mike Williams is a looking forward player.
Well, how did we screw up the Mike Williams thing?
You just both said no way, no go.
Okay.
She used the girly term swipe left on him.
Right. She did say that. Yeah.
She's going to swipe left, and that's what I'm saying is don't look back, look forward. Understand why the Pittsburgh Steelers, normally not very active in the trade world, went out and acquired Mike Williams. Realize who the quarterback there is with Mike Williams, and understand what they're trying to do going forward, and also understand that Mike Williams, even at 30 years old, is one of the greatest deep threat wide receivers. He's proven that to us. And then think about what that would look like with Baltimore trying to stop the rushing game and the deep passing game. And remember, Pittsburgh has them twice. So, I think Mike Williams is a very interesting play. And if you look at Pittsburgh's schedule, there's a lot of other softer secondaries that they'll be going up against.
All right. Okay. Well, I'll have to reevaluate then. I will look at the remaining schedule, and Ferrell, as you said, and I think as we as a country, this is good advice. Look forward, not behind, and see what's going on for fantasy football, because the championships are won in the future. They are not won in the past. They're not won in the present. I will have to reevaluate for sure. Let's talk about the Tennessee Titans here. Okay. Brian Callahan said Tyjae Spears is, quote, trending in the right direction for this weekend's game against the Los Angeles Chargers. Ben Arthur reporting this, a Chargers beat reporter. On Sunday, Spears is going to go through a pregame warm-up to make sure he is good to go. He is listed as questionable. This would be the first game he has played since week 6. Titans may or may not be easing him back in. This is not a question about what do we do with Tyjae Spears this week, Ferrell. This is a question of how Spears affects Tony Pollard. For those people that are planning on flexing Tony Pollard out. How bad is this going to be for him? Is it good that it will keep Pollard fresh throughout the whole game? Is it bad that he's going to eat into the touches? Knowing that Spears is questionable and may or may not play, do you do anything differently with Tony Pollard this week in your starting lineup?
I don't think so. I like what I've seen from Pollard and his scoring in fantasy ball. I'm still waiting for that breakout game, but I can see it happening on the field, the way he's moving, the way he's catching the ball, and the way they're using him in that offense. And I think the coach here's talking a lot about Spears, where he could just deflect the conversation about his quarterbacks, because he's got a quarterback coming back.
Mm-hmm. First time since September. We'll have Will Levis starting behind or under center, I should say, for the Titans this week too. So that's another factor to figure out when you're trying to decide whether or not to play Pollard this week. Honestly, I'm breaking ties against Pollard. I don't necessarily love him this week, and the Spears thing throws a monkey wrench into it. So again, depending upon what your the rest of your team looks like, I think that Pollard should probably be on more benches than in starting lineups.
I disagree. Let's check it.
Well, I know you disagree. I'm just saying, for me, okay, let's look at this for a second here. We're gonna get down to the nitty gritty here. Let's get down to the.
Let's call the Dizzle and see what he says.
The Dizzle, I guarantee you, the Dizzle's not available tonight. I guarantee it.
Yes.
Tony Pollard is at Los Angeles. Okay, Ferrell, I'm looking at this right now. Maybe I do have to reevaluate this. I'm looking at the Fantasy Pros ECR ranking, which I know you probably throw under the bus a little bit. I should be looking at Stacy Perez rankings right here instead of this. But Pollard is ranked a little bit higher than what I thought here. He's in that Hubbard, Najee Harris, David Montgomery neighborhood.
Ooh, that's good company.
That's very good company, and which makes me think that the analysts are just assuming that Spears is either not going to be active or not going to have much of effect, which is, I think, the way you're leaning here.
Spears is a backup running back. Pollard's the guy.
Okay. All right. Pollard is the guy. Let's move on and talk Theo Johnson here, Ferrell. I bring this up for people who are suffering through Brock Bowers, Tucker Kraft, David Njoku on bye this week, and they may be looking at Theo Johnson, maybe as a flex, maybe as a starting tight end. He was removed from the injury report. He is playing this week against the lowly Carolina Panthers in glorious Germany, as we have a 9:30 a.m. kickoff. Get your lineups in Saturday night. Theo Johnson did not practice much this week. He is coming off a career-high 51 yards. He gets in the end zone, 4 catches last week. What do you make of Theo Johnson as a potential flex this week for those people not having, quite frankly, 3 top 8 tight ends on the season out this week because of buys?
There's a lot of tight ends that will catch 3 passes in a game this weekend. Theo Johnson last week caught 3, and he looked good doing it. Jones found him free downfield. I don't know it. I want to look at what the Giants are doing with multiple tight end sets. The multiple tight end sets have been very, very good for the NFL teams this year. Been very, very bad for fantasy football. It's how you can explain what Freiermuth is doing in Pittsburgh and such as that. The Carolina tight end, if you're looking for a tight end that might be free, there's one that intrigues me, big number 0.
Jatavian Sanders, yep.
Who we liked early on in the year. But to answer your question, there's promise with Theo Johnson. We just had Daniel Jones is coming off one of the better games of his season. And he's about as hot as you're going to get as a third tight end on your team. And as a potential pickup on the waiver wire, probably not in the FFPC, but probably in other leagues. Could be on the waiver wire, but we're talking about the FFPC here. I don't know, but he's in that mix of, because once we get past the top 6 tight ends, we're in a mix of disappointment anyway. Guys that we were counting on, Dalton Schultz, Dallas Goedert, Chig from down in Tennessee, anyone that we were counting on to have a little better year at the tight end position has let us down. So we might as well give a shot at Theo Johnson, who could be that player that's a bit on the rise.
To let us down again this week.
Yeah, well, we'll take his 3 catches and hope he can run the ball, because you know what? I love the athlete, and he's going to be there someday. And if you got him in dynasty ball, do not let him go.
Yeah, I would agree. I would totally agree with that too. And if he's available in your FFPC Dynasty League, make sure you're picking him up because I think that could pay dividends big time down the road here. We got Chuck Root in the waiting room right now. Before I bring him on, Ferrell, one last thing I wanted to bring up, and something that I can't remember if we discussed this or not, but it has been eating away at me over the last couple of weeks. The Buccaneers pass catching situation, right? So Todd Bowles said Mike Evans is out this week, which we kind of figured. Tampa on bye next week. Earliest Evans is going to come back is week 12. Jenna Lane had this report earlier today. He has not played since week 8 when he got hurt in the middle of that game. What do you make of, obviously Cade Otton is a must start in the FFPC. Quite frankly, he's probably a must start in the KFFSC as well. But what do you make of these wide receivers? Jalen McMillan, Trey Palmer, Sterling Shepard. Can we glean any fantasy goodness from these guys this week as Tampa Bay is taking on the San Francisco 49ers at home? Do you like any of the wideouts for Tampa this week?
He's going to have to get rid of the ball very, very quickly, that being Baker Mayfield or Trask. And Balky, you've got to talk to us about this and what the latest news is, because I don't understand it. That Mayfield could be on the bench. I've been waiting to see Trask play a long, long time for this team, but not when I finally decide that Baker Mayfield is a consistent fantasy player and have him on my teams. And now I'm getting Trask potentially. But to answer your question, let's go back to New York last week, where the New York Giants had a successful game. They did it by utilizing everyone, and that's exactly what Tampa's going to have to do. This is not the same downfield passing team and Cade Otten, who back when we were having pros versus Joes, they were all calling him Cade Rotten. And, when we were drafting in at Planet Hollywood, and I said, geez, Godwin sure is going late. Evans sure is going late. Oh, Ferrell, their injury risk. They're going down because they're injury risk. Well, what's going to happen if they get injured? And, maybe the tight end steps up. He caught 45 balls last year. He's already caught that many this year. 25 in the last 3 weeks, 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games. This is a player waiting for an opportunity. And so, what's going to happen with the receiver core? Otten's going to get most of it if the middle of the field can stay free. And if they don't, they'll continue to run more tight ends in there to get whichever quarterback it is some extra time to get the ball out of his hands. I tend to like Palmer a little more than most people. And it was a pleasure seeing Sterling Shepard at this advanced age play injury-free. Sterling's been hurt for 3 years, and he keeps playing. And, he's not hurt now. He's running jet sweeps, and he's catching the ball, and he's putting his foot in the ground and cutting back. And it's fun to watch, although it doesn't mean more usually than 10 or 12 fantasy points.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's a muted upside, but I think about that final drive on Monday Night Football with Shepard making all those crazy grabs. Really, the last 2 drives where he made all those great grabs, and it was nice to see for sure. Going forward, I'm surprised to hear you like Palmer the best of the bunch, though. I mean, he probably has the highest ceiling with big plays, right?
And Palmer was a little more accessible in the free agency. And I had him on a couple of teams last year, and he was just a little more accessible than the other. Jalen is the other receiver.
Jalen McMillan, yes.
McMillan. And both have opportunities to be big receivers. Let's see who rushes to the forefront. But, I think about that game against Kansas City. We had a lot of weather game. And I think about Baker Mayfield and his old buddy from his Oklahoma days there with Sterling Shepard. That's why that was working. You lean on what you know.
Here's what I know about the Baker Mayfield situation, Ferrell.
Please.
No longer on the injury report.
Oh, hallelujah.
He did not practice Wednesday. He did not practice Thursday. Rick Stroud from the Tampa Bay Times posted on X that he is going to be fine. He practiced this week. Even with the toe injury, he is going to play. So we are in good shape if we are looking at Baker Mayfield this week. I'll tell you what, we're even in better shape if we're looking at getting fantasy advice from one of the best guys out there. A guy who, to your point, Ferrell, is very, very good when it comes to the KFFSC. You look at where his teams are at there, and you don't have any doubts. You look at where his team is in the Fantasy Pros Championship, 17th overall, heading into Sunday morning's game in Germany between the Giants and Panthers. A guy who has already won a $500,000 grand prize in the FFPC. Less than 2 years ago, we welcome him back on the show tonight, the proprietor of the Buff Chicken franchise in the FFPC. It is the incomparable Chuck Root. Chuck, welcome back to the show, man.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Coming in loud and clear, too, Bob.
That's right. All right.
Love it. Perfect. Yes. Chuck, I can't remember if we've had you on since you won that big $500,000 grand prize. And I may have asked you this already, so I apologize in advance. Is the money all gone? Have you spent that $500,000? Is there anything left?
There's a little bit left. No, I haven't been on since, but we invested it. We used the most of it though, but it stretches out okay. So.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've had the pleasure of meeting on multiple occasions Amber Root's, the great Amber Root that have come. And, Chuck is like the Hunt family. He travels with the whole family when he comes to Kentucky. You got mom, you get dad, you got the Amber. Sometimes Amber brings a bunch of her friends. This time they brought me a Buffalo Bills glass. Look at that, Balky. You don't have one of those.
Lovely. I don't have anything like
you
that.
Don't have, but no. But I've also had the pleasure of viewing Amber Root's wardrobe as she wears it in Kentucky, and I think a good part of the money's gone, Balky, because I'm looking at the wardrobe, and I'll say that's where some of it went. And I'll tell you what, Chuck Root's the kind of guy; he'll be the first guy to spend that money on someone else.
That's true. The nicest guy in fantasy football, for sure.
Well, thank you,
Chuck. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. I looked over some of your teams, some of your ownership of your squads before we had you on this week. But before we get to that, Ferrell and I were talking about this at the top of the show. This insane game we saw last night with the Bengals and Ravens. Burrow and Chase Brown and Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry and Rashad Bateman and Mark Andrews, pretty much everybody but the defenses and Zay Flowers was awesome last night, right? And you lucky son of a gun, had a team in the Fantasy Pros Championship that featured not only Joe Burrow, but Jamar Chase. What did they put up? About a combined 90 last night? And all of a sudden, you wake up this morning, you rub the sleep out of your eyes, you roll out of your bed, and you look at the scoreboard. Boom, 17th place. How does that feel?
Well, it was unbelievable because the game started off slow. The first half, not too much going on. Then the second half just blew up, and just watching it just pass to Chase right one after the other, and then the touchdowns. They even looked like easy touchdowns at one point. But then just to see those as the total pile up, and like you said, going from, I think it went 67 to 17 just in that one game. It's pretty nice to see. So
it's unbelievable. And you obviously have a leg up on the rest of the field as you chase this $1 million grand prize now going forward in week 10, which is tremendous and always something that makes the food taste a little bit better, the air a little bit sweeter when you move through your Friday and your Saturday heading into your Sunday game. So let's talk about your teams here. Okay. I noticed one of your most owned players in the FFPC is Quentin Johnston, a pariah in 2023, but a guy who's come back in 2024, catching touchdowns as if it were a bodily function. You have him on a bunch of teams this year. The only reason to have him on your teams is in the hopes that you might play him certain weeks. I don't know if that's happened yet, but your thoughts on what Quentin Johnston is going to bring for fantasy players, knowing that Ladd McConkey is probably the number one receiver there. Quentin Johnston always seems to have a big play in his back pocket.
Right. I mean, I have him on my rosters. He's more of a, bye week, fill in if I need him. But he's a guy with a lot of upside. I mean, he can put up big numbers. I think he's had 2 games this year over 20 points. One other decent game, but then he was injured. But he's just the guy I drafted at the beginning of the year thinking that, he's a late round flyer, take a chance on him. Herbert's got a big arm. He's a guy who could run deep. Why not? In a couple of the redraft leagues, he was dropped. So as soon as I saw him dropped, I picked him up right away. And, probably going to need him in at least one league this week, and we'll see where it goes from there. So,
and, when you have a guy like Johnson, I mean, lots of guys have bottom of the roster wide receivers. But, man, it's hard to have one that's the athlete like Johnson is. Right. And good for you for hanging on to him. That's a real change, what's going on with the L.A. Chargers. Herbert looks healthy. He looks like he's getting it. Ball's in the air. He's got some underneath passing that he can hit. And what can come down the field, you mentioned it. We talked about your teams in Kentucky doing well earlier and how we would like to have Mike Williams in his dual matchup against Baltimore in the remaining schedule. Well, I think the Chargers have Baltimore on. Yeah, I know they do because it's the famed Harbaugh ball.
Yeah, right. Harbaugh ball.
That's one where I'm going to look at Johnson and I'm going to say, it's difficult to keep this guy off the field. And maybe by then you'll know a little bit more about him. If you know anything about wide receivers, hip pointers and AC joints are the things that can just ruin your fantasy football. That and back issues, it didn't, because those are things that players can play through, like Pittman at Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. And I am so glad they have marked him out for this weekend because he's, everybody knows how much I admire Pittman if they listen at all to what we talk about. And it's difficult to bench him, but, he's out there trying to play a shell of his body and with the challenging situation at the quarterback. Let's go down to Atlanta where now we've got a player suffering from a hip pointer. Drake London is much like the same thing. If you drafted Drake London, you're going to say, man, I'm dying to play him. So you need somebody like your player with the Chargers, Chuck. What do you think about Drake London? Hopefully he can play through it at a high level. Hopefully it won't affect him moving forward. But London's really getting it. Talk to me about Drake London and how you want to go forward with him.
Well, I'm concerned this week. I have him obviously on a couple teams, and I'm not sure if I'm going to use him unless I really have to. I think going forward he's going to be fine, but this week, and then I know he's got bye in week 12. Just looking at possible replacements right now, and on my bench, I do have Johnston, I do have Josh Downs, and those are guys that I think that I'm going to look at possibly put in this week, well, especially Downs with Pittman out. But.
Yeah, we'll talk about Downs in a little bit. That game, the Falcons Saints game is if I could spell correctly, that is a 1:00 game. So we will know by 11:30 what London's status is. Obviously listed as questionable. Even if he does play, Chuck, and I think you kind of alluded to this, just don't know how effective he's going to be, especially in a game where the Falcons are the favorite. And this could be a big Kyle Pitts, Darnell Mooney, Bijan Robinson game. Why use London and get him out there if you don't have to against the Saints, who are in their first game since firing Dennis Allen, something that will have to weigh on Sunday morning when it comes down to it. I said a couple of weeks ago that, and I'm glad Bill Hollywood's in the chat because he kind of called me out on this, that I thought Isaac Guerrero was droppable now that, we had gotten to the 49ers bye week, and after the bye week, McCaffrey was supposed to come back. And Bill said, Balky, I think I might hang on to Guerrero if I were you. And I didn't in 2 leagues. I did get him back in one of my leagues for cheap off the waiver wire. But Chuck, your thoughts here. We don't know the health of Mason. We know he's questionable. We don't know exactly what his role would be if he is healthy, because Guerendo's looked pretty good when Mason's been hurt. What would you think is if somebody asked you, hey, what's the Niners backup I want to roster? Is it still Mason, or has Guerrero leapfrogged Mason into having into being that handcuff for McCaffrey right now?
I mean, I think it's still Mason just by what he's done this year, what he's proven. But I have Guerrero on a lot of my rosters, and I'm not dropping him yet. He's someone that I'm going to wait, see how this plays out a little bit, because when he's been in there, he's been impressive. And with obviously McCaffrey's injuries, with Mason's injuries, I'm going to keep him as long as I can. But right now, I think it would be Mason, but obviously that could change very quickly. So
it's a great commentary to the 49ers that they also have Elijah Mitchell, and it's 4 players that if you said, hey, that's the go-to guy, the starting running back. In fantasy football, we'd want to have rostered all of those guys.
Right.
Those are all fantastic players. Jimmy Williams is talking to me about the other 2, Downs and Pierce. There's no bigger Pierce fan, Jimmy Williams, than myself. But Flacco's skill set right now sort of invalidates him as a receiver. Downs would be the guy there, as Chuck Root says. Chuck, give me some information about what's going on in Dallas. Everybody's sort of dialing 911 down there, and I think when times get hard, you lean into the tight end, and I don't think there's a better young tight end in the league other than Ferguson. Bowers supporters would challenge me on that, but Ferguson to me is more of a complete player at the position. And I think Cooper Rush gets off the bench and plays for Dak not only this week, but apparently going forward. I think that's something he'll lean into and lean on, much like what we're seeing down in Tampa. Do you have the same upside and rosy picture that I have for Ferguson?
I do. I don't know if it's as rosy as yours, but I agree. I think Rush is going to lean on the studs, whether it's Ferguson and Lamb. But with Lamb banged up, I think Ferguson's the way to go. Obviously, their running game is not there at all. So I'm still putting Ferguson out every week in all my lineups.
Ferguson
go ahead, Balky.
Ferguson and Lamb, right? Those are the 2 guys, Chuck,
yes.
that we're still okay. Go ahead, Ferrell.
What about that very, very strange situation with Ezekiel Elliott being set down and not given a jersey last week due to his poor attendance at meetings and that type of thing? That looks like something straight out of Ted Lasso, and I was really shocked.
Mm-hmm.
I was really surprised to hear that for a team that doesn't. You look like you could kind of nip that thing in the bud down there. Is there anyone on the Dallas roster that you guys can see as making a step up? Who's the answer on the Dallas roster to the receiver Wallace that we saw in Baltimore last night? Who's going to basically rise above and do something for the Cowboys in this game?
Well, not in this game. I don't know. I guess I'd have to say Tolbert in this game. Maybe down the line if Cooks is healthy once he comes back. But right now Tolbert and Ferguson. That's where I'd go. If Lamb's not 100%.
Is Mingo, because Chuck, I know you play Dynasty in the FFPC too. Is Mingo even on your Dynasty radar right now in Dallas?
Not mine. Not at this point. I mean, if he comes out and shows something, then I'll reconsider it. But at this point, I wouldn't say so. No.
Ferrell, were you a fan of Jonathan Mingo coming out of Ole Miss? I can't remember.
To a degree, not as much as everyone else was, but I expected much better results than what we've had. Who's little number 5 down at Dallas, Balky? The kick returner, the kid from
is that Cavante Turpin?
Yeah, Turpin. I think Turpin is criminally underused in an offense that really could use something. So there's my guy. I don't think I'm going to be ballsy enough to start him anywhere, but we can see what happens.
Yeah, I would say even though he is a self-proclaimed highly successful coach, I am not surprised that Mike McCarthy would not notice certain talent that is languishing on his roster right now. That
said by a true Green Bay Packer fan. Chuck.
I'm just saying, like, from personal experience, I've seen it happen before. Let's talk about, speaking of the Packers, let's go to the NFC North. TJ Hawkinson this week, Chuck, his second week back. You'd expect the snaps to go up. You'd expect the routes run to go up. Minnesota this week gets a gift as they are playing the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, it is on the road, but the Vikings are 7-point favorites. How strong of a start is TJ Hawkinson in FFPC tight end premium weeks? Premium leagues in week 10 this week at Jacksonville?
I think it's a very strong start. I think every Minnesota player is a strong start. I just think that Jacksonville, I mean, they lame duck coach. Lawrence probably won't play. I just think that's going to be a bad scene. Mac Jones at quarterback. I just think Minnesota's going to run wild. Running the ball, whatever it is, just kind of hope that you get all your points in the first 3 quarters, though, because I think that one's going to be over early. But,
yeah. I think a rising tide raises all ships. The outlook that I had on Hawkinson coming into this season was very poor because I knew he tore his ACL late. I knew he would not have Kirk Cousins, but Sam Darnold's really impressed me. That Vikings offense has not only been adequate, it's been putting up points. You have the addition of Aaron Jones. Everybody on that team makes everybody else better. Hawkinson is going to be better for it. There is one league, Chuck, and I'll get your thoughts on this. In one of my dynasty leagues, my 2 tight ends are TJ Hawkinson and Sam Laporta, and I'm toying with benching Laporta this week for Hawkinson. What are your thoughts on that?
The way that Hawkinson was used last week in his first game, I mean, he did get a lot of usage. I know that Oliver still was part of the offense, but I think there's going to be a little bit more. I mean, Laporta hasn't been what, he was expected to be. So, I mean, that's a tough call, but I mean, I wouldn't have a problem going with Hawkinson. I think it's going to be a big week. I do.
Jameson Williams comes back too this week for Detroit too. I don't know how much that affects Laporta, but that is another proverbial pepper in the gumbo for fantasy players this week for sure. Anyway, Ferrell, let's get back to this Indianapolis Colts conversation, especially with Josh Downs here.
Well, I think that's who everyone wants to talk about, Balky. And do you recall from Darren Armani where the Josh Downs was going when we got to Planet Hollywood? Because I still think he was a bargain throughout the draft. Now, it's a bit off-putting to say that leading the Indianapolis Colts with Joe Flacco at quarterback is going to be a 5'9", 170-pound receiver. But he does get open on a team that doesn't really utilize the tight end and doesn't throw to the backs like other teams do. So Josh Downs, I see him catching the ball around the sidelines. I don't see him doing a whole lot with physicality because of his size, but I like what he brings to it, and I would not be scared to flex him at all. If you're forced as a number 2 wide receiver this weekend, you could probably do worse. Wow, 1404, really?
1404, yep. That was Andrei Yoshivash, Gabe Davis, Jalen McMillan territory. That's where Josh Downs went off as wide receiver 64.
He did have the hamstring injury, right? Was it a hamstring? He had something going on in training camp?
Now you're jogging my memory, Chuck. This is why we have you on the show, so we can. Chuck is not only a fantastic guest, he is an even better producer here, bringing me all the knowledge that my intern would normally have. Yeah, exactly. I'm looking that up right now. But Chuck, no Michael Pittman this week. There's a school of thought out there that would say, well, now that Pittman's not out there, the focus for the defense is going to be on downs because they just, with all apologies to your boy Alec Pierce, Ferrell, they don't have a guy that they have to worry about on the opposite side. But I just think he's going to be a target funnel on Sunday. Your thoughts on Josh Downs this week in Week 10?
No, I agree. I mean, with Flacco's in there, I think Downs is going to be the guy no matter what. You know, I had him in a lot of leagues. I had him in Dynasty, and I actually traded him away in Dynasty weeks back, you know, when Richardson was coming back, and I thought he wasn't going to be as effective. I wish that wasn't the case now. But it just seems that when Flacco's in there, I mean, he's his target. And, yeah, I agree. He's the one they're going to lean on this week. So
this guy can take a good one step off the line. And Chuck, I didn't form all my blabbering about Downs in the form of a question. But, you know, I just like the way he plays ball. And I tell you, Flacco at this point, Flacco gets that ball in his hands, and, man, it's coming out. And, you know, Downs is going to be the run after catch. Yeah, I think you're all over it. It's a good if you got Josh Downs on your roster, get him in the lineup. There's a lot of guys you can start him over.
To Chuck's point, August 7th, Josh Downs in 7-on-7 drills in training camp suffers a high ankle sprain and was expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks, which I think he didn't start the season healthy, if I remember correctly. He was out the first couple of weeks. So there you go. So. That could be a reason why his ADP was depressed for sure. Chuck, you're a Bills fan, correct? Obviously,
I'm not. I live here, but I'm not a Bills fan.
You're not a Bills fan, so you just happen to buy a Bills pint glass for Ferrell in Kentucky, even though you're not a fan. Now I understand. I got it. Okay. You live there. You follow it. You know the team.
Yeah.
What's the story on the backfield there? Is there a timeshare brewing between James Cook and Ray Davis that we as fantasy players need to understand before we click submit on James Cook in our lineups, not only in Week 10, but going forward, Chuck?
See, I wouldn't call it a timeshare right now. I mean, I think Ray Davis obviously has made some big plays, but at the same time, Cook, he's been impressive all year. I mean, the way he's been running the ball, he's been running hard, and this year he's scoring touchdowns, and that's something he wasn't doing before. So I think overall he's been impressive. I think the big thing that Buffalo needs to do, though, is stop using Ty Johnson. I think with him coming in, he's taken away some carries, some targets, especially in the red zone. And because of that, that's why it's kind of, given Ray Davis some spots here and there. But I think without Ty Johnson, you're looking at Cook, the main guy. Ray Davis will still get plenty of work, but also helps that Josh Allen's not running the ball as much this year. And so the running game's going through the backs, which that hasn't been the case the last couple of years. So. No timeshare yet, I don't think. So.
Not yet.
But
we'll see what happens. But it may not happen. Like it could be we make it through this entire season where James Cook is the bell cow and he's the guy you want to start. Ray Davis is simply an injury away type guy, and then all of a sudden in 2025 that could change. But for 2024, I think James Cook is in pretty good territory to not have to worry about Ray Davis as long as he's healthy.
That's what I think.
We called the Ray Davis as being a player that you want on your roster. We called that back in.
Wait. Where did he go? Where did he go to school?
He went to school at a little place over in Lexington, basketball school, predominantly known as the university. And he was a kind of player that even as a college player, you really, really root for when you know his story. And I think everybody here knows his story. Everybody in fantasy football knows the story of Amari Cooper. If you drafted him this year, you're patiently waiting. Should you continue your patience this weekend with him, Chuck, and put him in your lineups?
To continue to wait this weekend, yes. I probably won't be playing him this weekend. I know right now he's questionable still. He hasn't been ruled out. With Keon Coleman not playing, I know that leaves some openings, but, I mean, I'm not using him yet. I think that the Bills will, passing game is going to be Shakir and then maybe Kincaid. I'm not touching Cooper this week. Not yet. Not until he shows that he can do a full workload, the playbook, everything. So still new to the team. So
I don't know who had it. It was one of the Bills beat reporters, could have been Biscaglia, or somebody had a quote from Amari Cooper. He was wearing a soft cast on his wrist, and somebody asked him, well, what's that like playing with that? And Cooper, and I'm paraphrasing massively here, but the gist of it was, well, I don't have any problems catching. How did he phrase this? Gripping the ball is not a problem, but catching it might be an issue, or something to the effect like he felt more confident in his ability to grip the ball rather than catch the ball. And I'm like, if you're a receiver, I don't care if you can grip it or not. If you can catch it and it counts as a catch, that's all I care about. Like, and so it was a little off-putting, and I believe he's wearing that soft cast on Sunday too. Limited practice each and every week this week. I'm with you, Chuck. I may have to start him in one league, but I'm trying to find a way where I can keep him on my bench. Even with Keon Coleman out this week,
he's had trouble catching the ball all year too, though. So,
and his career, like I've seen a lot of drops from him too. Shakir has really surprised me how he's been able to keep up his fantasy value after the Cooper trade. He's been really good.
Yeah, I think Shakir he was off to such a great start too. Then he had that ankle injury, but he's back. So.
Bucky, I don't think you're surprised about Shakir. You know he's a player.
I know he's a player, Ferrell, and I drafted him in a few spots this year because I believed in him. But after the Cooper trade, I was surprised how much he kept up his fantasy value, having some of his best weeks with Cooper in the lineup.
You put a Pro Bowler like Cooper on the field next to you, all of a sudden you're not covered as much.
And maybe that's what it is. Yeah. Maybe that's what it is. But I've been very pleasantly surprised that his fantasy value has maybe even increased since the trade. You don't always see. A couple of emails here for you, Chuck. First one, let's go to Tim in San Diego. What does the Chuba Hubbard signing mean for Jonathan Brooks? This was confusing as all get out. You utilize heavy draft capital, second round draft pick on Jonathan Brooks this year. You already had Hubbard. Okay, fine. I get it. He was headed to free agency. 4 years, $33 million, opportunity to earn $37 million. You play Dynasty. Can we make heads or tails out of this? What it means for Hubbard and what it means for Brooks in Carolina, of all places.
Right. I mean, it's kind of crazy because, I mean, they paid Miles Sanders the year before all that money too. So they have all this money invested in the running backs. Then you have Brooks. But I know from what they're trying to talk about, a Detroit thing with, Gibbs and Montgomery and that same type of backfield. I mean, I could see that. But, yeah, that was odd when that came across. So.
Well, you do have Brooks on a rookie deal for
right. And I mean, if I had Brooks in Dynasty, I still would feel pretty good about it. I mean, I think that until we see him on the field, see what he could do, I think that's going to be a big difference there.
How would you feel if you had Hubbard in Dynasty?
Well, I feel a little bit better now. I mean, before I wasn't feeling well because it looked like he was gone. But yeah, I'm good for another year, I think. So
okay, all right, perfect. One more email here for you, Chuck. Ron in Williston, Florida. How does Gus Edwards affect J.K. Dobbins' production this weekend? And the update that we received on Edwards is not only has he been, I believe, designated a return, he's listed as questionable this week and could play this weekend. Dobbins is a guy that has been enjoying massive workloads this year. And I say enjoying because he hasn't hit the shelf yet, which is sort of his MO. It hasn't happened yet this year. And I wonder if this is the perfect opportunity for Harbaugh to ease off the throttle with J.K. Dobbins, give Gus Edwards a little bit more action, given how much fresher he should be. And Dobbins, to me, for the last month, Chuck, has been kind of like this borderline second running back each and every week. And I wonder how much we have to rethink that now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously Dobbins was a lot more explosive at the beginning of the year, but also, I mean, I don't think Edwards looked right at the beginning of the year either. I mean, I didn't really see anything from him in those first couple of weeks before he got hurt. And then now you have Vidal, who's, been filling in, looking okay, I thought. So I really don't see Edwards, moving in at this point. Obviously, if Dobbins goes down like he does every year, that's going to be a different story. But I wouldn't worry yet. I think actually Dobbins going to, kind of set up for a good week this week too. So.
Yeah, I'm starting him in the leagues I have him. I'm still starting him for sure. Before Ferrell asks you the final question, let's go to Michael Kinzel on YouTube. He has a question. I believe this is a FantasyPros Championship team, if I remember correctly. He's got Amari Cooper, Bucky Irving, Jonnu Smith, Demarcus Robinson. He can only play one of these guys. He says he's leaning Demarcus Robinson. Chuck, is that the right play, knowing his other options here?
Yes, I would say either Robinson or I'd say Jonnu in that Monday night game. Those would be my two choices, but yeah, I'd say Robinson at this point as well.
In FFPC scoring, he might look at somebody else to see if he can get Jonnu on the field. But guys, what did Robinson score last weekend in 27?
Yeah, well, he had the overtime TD too, right? So
yeah, so it. As we say here down here in Kentucky, don't shoot the horse that won the race.
Unless unless that horse's teammate is not going to be ejected this week.
But
that'd be
but also though, but with the
consider.
Jonnu thing too, what didn't Tyreek popped up again with a wrist injury?
Yes.
So I mean, I would keep an eye on that. I mean, they're both playing Monday night, so it's something you'll know at that point. But that'd be something I'd keep an eye on too. I'm sure he's fine. I'm sure he'll play, but that might sway me a little bit.
Yeah, our good buddy Permar99 is not in the chat room tonight, but he will be the first one to point out that even when Tagovailoa went down, we saw less usage from Hill and Waddle. But since he's come back, we've still seen a lot of usage from the running backs and the tight end in Miami, and that could happen again. Demarcus Robinson last week, 9 targets for 6 catches, 6 of them for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns. It was a big Boffo week for Demarcus Robinson last week. Will that continue? We'll find out. But I think, Chuck, that's a really good point. Just to kind of suss this out, wait and see on Monday night. If Tyreek Hill misses, I think Jonnu Smith is your man. If Tyreek Hill plays, then you can just easily stick in Demarcus Robinson. That's the way to roll with it. Ferrell, let's roll with one final question for Chuck.
That was just brilliant. That means if I ask Chuck this question, Chuck goes away. I'm holding out. Okay. Well, all right. Chuck is a very, very positive guy. It depends on the kind of guy you have is how I ask this question. But Chuck, your crystal ball that you utilize whenever you're here in Kentucky, it never really steers you wrong. So tell us, first of all, on the negative side, who's a player that we're going to be disappointed with? You can't use Pittman because I've been disappointed every week.
And he's out.
And he's out. So you can't. You're saved from using him. But there's lots of other. Just give me. We already talked about London. Give me a guy that is going to be unusually disappointing this week. And then I think it's great time in double-digit weeks as we get to week 10 to talk about who that sleeper is, who that emerging player is, the guy we've waited to get in the lineups all year.
Well, it's fine. One guy who I'm not big on this week you were talking about earlier. I think Cade Otton, takes a step back this week. I understand that the receiving core is down, but I think we're going to see a different San Francisco team coming off their bye. I just think that the defense is going to be better. McCaffrey back. Purdy, I think, is going to have a big game. I just think that overall, Otton's going to be the one that they're going to focus on stopping because he's been so impressive the last couple of weeks. So that's one guy that
frustrate him. Yeah, they could frustrate him trying to get off the line.
Yeah. So as far as sleepers going forward, I don't know if there's one guy that I would call a deep sleeper or anything like that, but there's one.
I'll take 2. I'm in need. I'll take 2.
I mean, not a real deep sleeper,
maybe 3 if you've got them. I don't know. Just bring it on.
Well, there's a guy I like who shouldn't be a sleeper, but who has been struggling lately, who I think is ready to bust out this week, just because I kind of like the narrative of things, and I think DJ Moore this week with everything that's gone on with him and the trouble that he's having in Chicago, I think we're going to see a couple of big weeks out of him with that offense. They need to get something moving here, and he's someone that I think is going to step up. So I know that's not the deep sleeper you were looking for, but
no,
that's a guy who's been struggling that I think that is going to turn it around a little bit. I really do.
When you get an answer like DJ Moore, the sleeper, the problem is with the person who asked the question. I asked the question and I must have foobarred it all. Chuck, I want a sleeper, damn it.
You want to sleep?
I want to sleep.
How deep do you want to go with sleeper?
Let's do like maybe a
24th round.
We don't have to go that deep, but maybe like a consensus like top 40 receiver, a consensus top 30 running back that maybe if all things considered, you still kind of want to keep him on your bench, but if forced into it, this guy could make some waves this week.
All right. Well, back to San Francisco. How about Juwan Jennings? Is that one going to be deep enough?
That's a good one. Ferrell, that's a good one.
He already put up 45 in one game, Chuck.
Right, but not much in the others. I think that's, obviously with Ayuk gone and Debo, you never know with him. I think he's one that from here on out is going to be a guy you're going to want to use, I think.
I'm going to throw you a deep sleeper, Chuck.
A deep one?
A deep sleeper. I'm going to go to Tennessee.
Okay.
A touchdown in each of the last 4 games. Wide receiver Westbrook Akini. There's my sleeper. There's my deep sleeper for Chuck. Not that you would need him with the tremendous teams you have, but I picked him up on waivers this week. There's my deep sleeper.
Yeah, Westbrook Akini, 5 for 50 and a touch against the Patriots, 2 for 39 and a touch in Detroit. He gets the Chargers in Southern California this week. So, yes, certainly, Ferrell, that would be a sleeper.
Tough,
for sure.
Yeah, tough Chargers defense. So,
Yeah.
Chuck, let me throw this one at you. I co-manage my 11-year-old son's team. We picked up Cade Otton a few weeks ago. Would you play McBride over Otton this week?
I would. Yep,
Okay.
I would.
All right.
Yeah.
Kind of the way we were leaning, but I wanted to get it straight from the horse's mouth.
Yep.
In New York, the guy who won $500,000 in the FFPC World Famous Playoff Challenge less than 2 years ago. He'll be try to get back that belt this year, but he's got bigger fish to fry right now. 17th overall in the Fantasy Pros Championship, making his way, leading several KFFSC leagues right now as we head into Week 10. The man, the myth, the legend, the Chuck Root. Always welcome on this broadcast, Chuck. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. Good luck in Week 10 and good luck the rest of the way, my friend.
All right. Thank you for having me. All right. Take care, guys. Thank you.
You got it. That is Chuck Root, ladies and gentlemen. One of the best guys out there. Fun guy to talk to for sure. His sleeper was deep enough for me, Ferrell. It was not deep enough for you, though.
No, we can't. We can't have a sleeper that was drafted in the first 6 rounds.
No, but then he said Jawan Jennings, but that didn't.
Jawan Jennings.
Yeah.
Well, I drafted Jennings.
Did you really?
Well, yeah, and on that 45, it was after the Pearsall incident, and everybody loved Pearsall. Why wouldn't you love Jennings? I watched Jennings. I really like Jennings. I started him on the 45-point game. On the 6 teams I had him, I started him 4 times, and I still felt like a loser. When you have a 45-point guy on your bench, it just really hurts. It just really does.
I had that with Cousins a few weeks back, where it was the biggest gut punch ever on Thursday night. It was the night that Pete Alonso hit that 3-run shot to knock the Brewers, my Milwaukee Brewers, out of the playoffs. And then I flip on Thursday Night Football, and Kirk Cousins has 500 million yards in the third quarter on my bench in all the leagues I had him in. One of the worst Thursdays.
Billy Hollywood's thrown up some great commentary tonight. He was a pleasure to have in the league this year.
Yeah, here's the best part of what he said.
Oh,
what a great Friday
that's
night.
A compliment.
It always is a great Friday night.
Compliment.
When you
and
get
Trevor Host talking about Matt Collins of all things.
I missed that. Where's he talking?
Trevor's up there. All he just said was Matt
for a sleeper.
He just said Mac Hollins dropped the mic and walked off.
But it is interesting for a sleeper this week for Mac Hollins. Now I think that's too deep even for the likes of me. But Amari Cooper battling the wrist injury. No Keon Coleman this week. Okay, that's a deep sleeper.
Mm-hmm. All right. We only got 30 points out of him a couple years ago when he was a Raider.
That's true. True. Let's go rapid fire on these starter sit questions here, Ferrell, that we have from the listeners. Ed in Arlington, Texas, Wandale Robinson or Xavier Worthy. For me, now I shared this story. I don't know if you stayed long enough on the broadcast last night with Stacey and I, but I shared the story of the Big Payback Auction League in the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, taking on Brad Cruz this past week. I go in to Monday Night Football, and I am down by I got to think about this. I am down by
You're down.
I'm down by 0.9 points, I think.
Wow.
I think that's what it was. I was down by 0.9. And Brad, I was going against Brad. I had nobody left. Brad had Xavier Worthy. And Xavier Worthy famously in that game touched the ball once, negative 10 yards, which means Brad lost a point from Xavier Worthy that night. And he ends up losing to me by 0.1 points. Incredible. With me having nobody left on Monday. It's one of the things I'm going to tell the grandkids about someday, Ferrell. Yes. I will never forget something like that. Immediately, I told Dizzle that and I told Stacy that. And the first thing both of them said, "Did you talk to Brad about it?" And I said,
I hear Stacy saying that now.
I don't really want to have that conversation with Brad Cruz. I like him. I don't want to, I don't want to pick at the scab. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. So for me, Xavier Worthy just simply not involved in the game plan enough. I know Juju Smith-Schuster is going to miss again this week, but Hopkins looks awesome. Kelsey looked great. Wandale Robinson is still more involved in the game plan with or without Neighbors. So I trust Robinson more than Worthy this week.
Yeah, and I think it depends on what you need. If you're trailing in that league by a lot of points, put Worthy out there. if you're gonna have a Brad Cruz stand down like you did, Wan'Dale Robinson has a better floor.
The next one I'll go to here is from Steve in Denver, and he wants to know what he should be doing at tight end. Yeah, Dallas Goedert or Cole Kmet. Now, the latest we received on Goddard earlier this afternoon, no longer in the injury report. He's playing against the Cowboys, hurt his hamstring in week 6, has not played since then, but all 3 practices have been full this week, and he should be a full go against the Cowboys. Cole Kmet, on the other hand, taking on the New England Patriots. Your thoughts here? Who would you rather play? Goddard in his first week back off of injury, or Cole Kmet taking on the fighting Patriots of New England at home in Soldier Field?
The quarterback's not going to be subject to a whole lot of pressure from New England. He's going to be able to throw from a spot. I think he can target Kmet better. They don't like a situation where Kmet gets shut out. He's a part of their offense. They're likely want to keep him involved, get him involved. I like Kmet.
It's close for me. I lean towards Kmet here. I am just a little bit nervous about his first week back with Goddard. There could be an easing back into the offense there, which is, I think, what you're alluding to. There's no easement with Kmet. He should be involved in that game. So I lean towards Kmet here. Jaden Daniels or Sam Darnold is the next question, writes Jeremy in Brainerd, Minnesota. Daniels, who's been unbelievable this season, gets the Pittsburgh Steelers in our nation's capital. Sam Darnold is on the road this week. He goes to Jacksonville. Ferrell, which way are you leaning here between Daniels and Darnold?
I watched the receivers of the Vikings catch the ball and catch the ball some more in the last game. That's where I'm going. With the players around him, that's what I want to do. Pittsburgh can still roll up a defense. They can still shut you down. They can keep you out of the end zone. They do better than most teams in the NFL. Let's go with Darnold.
Darnold for the Vikings is playing in a game with a total of 43, where they are 7-point favorites. Daniels, 3-point favorites, total of 45. I'm actually going to lean towards Daniels here, not just because of the facts I just cited, but I do believe in his legs a little bit more.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's going to carry him. I think that'll be the difference this week. Very, very close. Yeah, I am playing Darnold in a couple of leagues, but I will lean towards Daniels here over Darnold. The last one, let's go back to Dallas. Rico Dowdle, the running back for the Cowboys, or David Montgomery, one of the running backs that Detroit has. Jason in Charlotte is torn between these two this week, Ferrell. Who are we playing between Dowdle and Montgomery this week?
You shouldn't be torn, Jason. Run Montgomery out there and run him off.
Yeah, I totally agree. The Cowboys offense, to me, I know I saw, 2 years ago where Cooper Rush made those starts. Wasn't great, that great of an offense. In these situations, I usually lean towards the more explosive offense, the better offense. That's clearly Detroit here, and I'm going to go with Montgomery over Dowdle.
And you go back to last week, and Gibbs had a fantastic game, but Montgomery got his too. He might have even outrushed Gibbs for yardage. I'm not sure.
I think he might have. I know Gibbs got into the end zone, but I think yardage-wise, I think you're right. I think Montgomery had more. Ferrell, that is going to be a wrap on tonight's show. Great job from you. We will check out the KFFSC, kffsc.com, and we will graciously await your reappearance on this show 6 days and 23 hours from now, when we return to do this show at 10 o'clock Eastern time next Friday. Thanks, man. Enjoy week 10. We'll talk with you soon.
Thank you, sir.
That is Ferrell Elliott, the definitive commissioner of fantasy football, hanging out with us here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour for Friday, November 8th, 2024. I want to thank Chuck Root, Ferrell Elliott, the FFPC, Rob Bryce, and of course, each and every one of you for streaming, downloading, listening, watching this show. I'll certainly appreciate it. Next week, we will be back 10 o'clock Eastern time. 5-time FFPC league winner Eric Von Gutenberg will be joining us on the show 10 o'clock. That's going to be a lot of fun. Rotoviz High Stakes Lowdown this past Tuesday, in case you missed it. 5-time FFPC main event champions John Laskowski and Barney Newkirk joined me. That was a fun night talking ball with those guys. You can rewatch it on any of the FFPC socials if you want to later on before kickoff on Sunday. we will be back at 10 o'clock on Tuesday for more RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown next week. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network, as you heard from Ferrell, Stacey Perez co-hosted with me last night for 2 hours leading into that great Bengals-Ravens game. We will be back on that show this coming Thursday at 7 o'clock. RotoViz's Hassan Rahim will join me for a lead-in into the Commanders-Eagles Thursday night game. It's the best best pregame show out there for Thursday night football. Join us both at the Better Sports Network and the FFPC socials as well. Check out the FFPC Weekly Challenge. No draft or salary cap. 10 or 12 players, depending upon if you want to play with kickers and defenses or not. 1 player per team, no stacking. Enter for as little as $35. Win up to $2,500. 10, 30, and 100 team contests. Go to myffpc.com. Myffpc.com is where to go. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, and get notified each and every time we go live, which will be Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern time for the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown. Apologize for my voice tonight. I'm battling something right now. I will rest it, and it will be better next week. Thank you so much for watching. Your weekend officially starts now.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com. It was broadcast live and was watched around the world. Balky and Ferrell will be back next week with more analysis, more interviews, and more advice from guests much smarter than they are. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk with you again next week.
One other thing, I know I mentioned it once during the show, I'll mention it again. We have a 9:30 a.m. kickoff from, I believe, Munich. If it's not Munich, it's somewhere in Germany. Panthers and Giants. Make sure you set your lineups very, very early on Sunday morning, or what I would recommend, set them Saturday night. So you make sure that you have all your ducks in a row and don't get left out in the cold when that early kickoff happens on Sunday morning. Thanks for watching, everybody. For James Hicks and Oinker, we say good night, good luck in Week 10, and we'll talk with you again next week.